Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is none other than Jason Yormark. Jason is the founder of Socialistics, a leading social media agency that helps businesses turn their social media efforts into real measurable results. With more than 20 years of marketing experience under his belt, managing the social media efforts for the likes of Microsoft Advertising, Office for Mac, the U.S. Air Force, Habitat for Humanity, and more, Jason has led the field, becoming recognized as a top B2B social media influencer and a thought leader by publications including Forbes. He's recently published the wildly popular book, Anti-Agency, A Realistic Path to a $1 Million Business, and hosts the Anti-Agency podcast where he shares stories of doing business differently. Joining the show today for a discussion about the social media strategies that drive real results, unique and different ways to think about running your business, how to create your realistic path to a $1 million business, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming to the show the incredible Jason Yormark. Hey, Jason, how are you, man?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And really grateful for you to make the time to do this. It's a little behind the curtain stuff, but people love this. So we had a scheduling conflict and basically just got back together. And I just want to sort of express, my gratitude for you being willing to be flexible with us, because we're just thrilled to death to have you here. And in learning about you and studying or preparing for this conversation, like I've discovered so many things that we have in common. So I'm actually really looking forward to this chat.
Cool.
So cool. So let's start a little bit just kind of at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you are, where you come from, and what your early days were like before you were doing what you're doing today.
Yeah. So, I'm getting old, 25-year marketer. I got started early, right around the .com bust, kind of learned a little bit about SEO and web design and just helping, businesses kind of get online. And I think that's really where my entrepreneurial bug started to really get going. And but I always kind of was in the mindset of play it safe, get the job, 9 to 5, sit at a desk, get your paycheck, benefits, all that stuff, have bills to pay. So it never, an entrepreneurship path didn't feel realistic to me. So I just kind of, I went through the motions and had different jobs. And as a marketer, it was like a revolving door, whether I was being laid off or let go for a variety of reasons, economy or businesses just wanting to go in different directions. I was always embarrassed by my revolving door career, but as I got older and I looked at LinkedIn, I started to see, all marketers actually change jobs every 2 years for whatever reason. It was kind of an aha moment for me, but thought I wanted to be a teacher, coached high school volleyball. I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. Always loved teaching people and educating. Got my master's degree and got into the classroom. And within a day, I was like, this is not the same as coaching. I have made a terrible mistake. This is probably not for me. And I had to rethink my career strategy. And luckily at the time, this is right around 0405, Microsoft is hiring like crazy. And went through some interview processes with them and got an offer. They said, you can go to New York or Seattle. And I said, well, I'm not going to New York. No disrespect to New Yorkers, but not my speed. So I went to Seattle. And I've been there ever since. Worked for Microsoft for about 7 or 8 years. Really, we were able to get some incredible experience there. Just working with all kinds of different people from all different aspects of life. Again, this is right around social media was starting out, so I got in early and helped kind of craft social media for Microsoft Advertising, eventually Office for Mac. Parlayed my experience at Microsoft for a variety of different agency jobs. But always wanted to do my own thing. And for me, that just came later in life. My early 40s, I was able to finally figure out the path to freedom for me, which was Socialistics. And for about 4 or 5 years, we've been able to, build a successful social media agency and living, my best life. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I love that. I really appreciate you kind of breaking it down that way. And actually, one of the things that I think is such a good thing, especially for entrepreneurs who may feel like maybe they've missed the boat or maybe something happened and they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing or whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's this insecurity that people have where they feel like they've done the wrong things, or maybe I misstepped, or, I'll never get there, and that kind of thing. So I love that it almost came to you at an older age. I think for a lot of people, I mean, myself included, worked in agencies, worked in places like that. I started some form of my business nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But the company that exists today is totally different, right? And
Sure.
part of that is age. And I think that in order to get there, there's almost no shortcuts, right? I
Hmm.
think a lot of times you listen to these like brilliant minds on YouTube and all these kind of places, that you know kind of make you feel inspired like something's going on, but they're actually making you feel horrible because you haven't accomplished all you should have.
Sure.
And so so when I hear a story like yours where it's it finally clicked after all these years of experience, it really takes me back to this metaphor that we've sort of been working on just over the course of this show. I mean, you're episode number 272, so that's nearly 265 interviews that we've done on this show.
Sure.
And in that time, we've really learned about this idea of sort of layering on education, right? That there really is no shortcut.
Hmm.
And you might be able to optimize or maybe not step on the same landmine that somebody else did, but at the same time, you kind of have to go through the trials to be able to really apply this stuff in real
For
life.
sure.
So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about just sort of the birth of socialistics
Hmm.
itself. So
Yeah.
you got to this point in your career, you'd been laid off, you'd worked, you've done all
Hmm.
these different things. At
Yeah.
the point you decided the entrepreneurial life was for you.
Yeah.
Why social media? Why was this the direction for you?
Well, I think, I when you think about starting a business, you obviously want to tap into whatever resources that you do have. And resources take the shape of money, time, expertise, the relationships that you have. For me, really all I had was my experience. I had basically been in social media at that point in time for about 12, 13 years. That was my experience. I knew how to navigate those waters for clients successfully. I had seen it been done wrong so many times, so that was the least path of resistance for me in terms of being able to build a business that could scale and take advantage of my experience. So I had some reservations. I thought, well, do I really want to narrow my focus so much and walk away from other opportunities? But, that was a necessary choice. I think in this day and age, you really need to specialize. You need to kind of specialize either vertically or horizontally, like pick an industry or pick a specialization. And in many cases, I'd say even do both, and you're going to set yourself up for success. So I decided, I'm going to go horizontal. I'm going to pick social media, and that's the path we're going to go down, and we're going to stick to it. So that was, it was kind of a no brainer for me. I didn't want, to invent a product. I didn't have some, you know, masterful idea of something to create. That was just, it made sense for me at the time. And certainly the level of success that we've been able to have has a lot to do with the fact that, I brought that experience to the table.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And actually, one of the things that you hit there is this idea of niches, right? Narrowing our scope a little bit.
Yep.
It's funny. And, as a guy who's sort of contemporary with you in terms of age, we've grown up in a period where part of our life was lived pre-internet and then part of our life was lived post, so we have the advantage of perspective where we can kind of see how far things have come.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that seems to have happened with the internet is it's enabled everything. Right now, all of a sudden, anybody can do anything, anywhere, anytime.
Right.
But the reality is, with more options, like success is still found in choosing individual things, right? Narrowing down.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, even myself included, I mean, our agency was a general purpose agency for almost its entire existence. Really only in the last few years have we been trying to niche down into specific.
Yeah.
But it's not something that occurred to us, right? The idea was, oh, well, I know how to do this and this and this and this, so let's do all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but like they say, I mean, it's a little cliche, I suppose, but they say the riches are in the niches, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea being that by narrowing your scope, but I think it's exceedingly challenging these days because we all, especially if you enter into like a startup environment, for example, where you're forced to wear many hats, you become expert at many things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's different than, maybe our grandparents' generations where you just did one job your whole life and then retired. Now we're asked to be very agile in the workplace. And so we have to pick up a lot of different skills. So I think being able to pick one that is your true expertise, but also having the discipline to niche down like you've done is a really great approach.
Yeah, you need to it's tough to do because your initial instincts are, I don't want to limit myself to just this thing in case other people want other things. The reality is if you don't do that, if you're just starting out now or you're in the beginning stages, you're gonna face some incredible challenges getting anybody's attention if you are trying to be everything to everybody, either through the number of things that you offer or the number of industries that you're trying to serve. You really need to narrow your focus because it's all noise. I mean, people, attention spans are shrinking. People are getting more and more irritated with the volume of communication that's being sent their way through email, texting, phone calls. We're getting inundated with ads and advertising, all these things. It all becomes noise. And so unless you have a very narrow, specific message that speaks specifically to that decision maker and what they do and what's important to them, it's just going to get glossed over. So you really need to kind of carve out, a more narrow path and then build off of that. Otherwise, I mean, it's, to your point, anybody can do anything these days. Marketers are a dime a dozen, and especially, if you're looking to get into the agency game or be a like, you better really have a narrow focus and build a portfolio of work that caters to a very specific thing if you want to get anybody's attention and to be able to scale a business.
Yeah. Well, and I always joke that my greatest competition, as a graphic design guy, as a guy in the art trade, my greatest competition is always somebody's cousin. Right. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got Photoshop, and I'm sure you can relate.
Yep.
It's every
right, yeah.
teenager can run Twitter. What do I need?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So I mean, it's funny how, the simplified version of what we do is this, but really where you actually gain, I guess, acclaim, or you become more important or more valuable to your prospective client is in your niche, in the fact that you own this thing and you're expert at this thing.
Yeah. Sure.
It's not about running a Twitter profile, but rather it's the high level strategy that informs what we run on that Twitter profile.
Sure. Yeah.
So I also wanted to say too, just in the spirit of niching, because I think you hit it exactly on the head, what people's concern is when it comes to that, which is, I don't want to limit myself. I want to be available. It's kind of the Walmart mentality, right? If I'm the cheapest, everyone will come.
Right.
And so it's this idea that everyone should be your client, when in reality, they probably shouldn't be. But you mentioned that, people are afraid of that. But I just wanted to mention that I think for a lot of us, and you can probably speak to this too, is that your diversity in work comes in your clients. Right. So you're doing social media, but you're doing social media for a range of clients across a number of industries. And as a result, you're getting your diversity that way. You're delivering this piece. You've niched into doing social media strategy, for example. But you're getting your breadth of life experiences by way of getting clients that you enjoy working with, that are doing things that your company believes in or that you're willing to work for. And so I want to maybe dissuade some of the niching fear by saying something like that.
Yeah, and also a couple things happen when you niche and you focus on a particular area. If you do it well and you treat your clients well and you deliver results, they're going to ask you, "Oh, do you do this other thing?" Or we have this other need, and you can handle that in one of two ways. Like sometimes we'll stray a little bit from what we do if a client specifically asks us if it's within our wheelhouse. But more importantly, what I do is I build partnerships. I have partnerships with, a web agency or a PR agency or search marketing or SEO. And, if you build that relationship, now I could tap into these people and say, yeah, I've got somebody for you. I trust them. I worked with them. I could plug you right into that. And you're helping them, and then those partnerships then obviously will return the favor. So even though you're not being everything to everybody, if you build trust with your clients, they're going to ask for these other things, and if you've got these partnerships in place, you can kind of plug them into these opportunities, and then you almost extend the opportunities that come your way. If you've got good partnerships, you're sending them leads, they're sending you leads, and it's kind of a win-win. So it can be a little bit uncomfortable up front, but if you want to succeed in 2022 and beyond, you're going to have to kind of really narrow what you do to make any sort of movement.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I really like your thoughts about sort of collaboration or working with partners. I mean, really the I guess the evidence of being a great vendor, or a great provider for your client, so when your client comes to you and they ask you for something, your willingness to be honest with them and say, hey, that's not our wheelhouse. And B, I've got a resource for you. Those two skills make you a tremendous partner for somebody. And so as a great vendor or a great, provider, those are amazing skills to have.
For sure.
So I wanted to sort of, I guess, lead off of this, in terms of your life history. Now we understand why you've started your business, why Socialistics does what it does, all that kind of stuff. But I wonder if we can now talk about sort of the early days to where we are today, and maybe put this even in the frame of your book, and talk about this, $1 million business. How do we go from zero to $1 million? And so maybe we can talk a little bit about what that path was like for you, and maybe we can extrapolate that for other people.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was the breaking point for me and being able to kind of finally get to where I wanted to. And there's a chapter in the book. It's probably my favorite chapter in the book. It's basically, creating a runway, because most of us don't have the resources and the ability to take significant risks. You've got kids, you've got bills, you need that steady paycheck, you need the benefits. So, taking a leap in entrepreneurship can be a lofty leap for most. So oftentimes, it's one of those things that kind of gets set aside and, maybe someday. So, and I had thought through that many times, and I knew if I was ever going to be able to take that leap, I needed to build a runway for myself. I wouldn't be able to just take a leap. So I knew I created a plan for myself. I think in my mind at the time it was like a 2-year plan. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna create a brand, and I'm gonna do some things on the side while I have jobs to kind of build some momentum that I hopefully can then slide into at some point. So I built a brand. I started blogging. I started putting content out. I started trying to create awareness of my brand. It's a slog. It's a marathon. Like it's competitive. I'm trying to get to the front page of Google for terms that relate to what I do. So I got to constantly put stuff out. Taking on a few side hustle projects, and taking them on for less cost. It's like I'm just starting out. People don't know me. I'm like, hey, normally I would charge this. I'll do it for free for 3 months if you agree to allow me to, have a portfolio piece that speaks and get a review from you. Like, so if you're not reliant on the business financially, you can take some heavy risks in helping build some momentum around. So you kind of put all these things in place. So I did that, and sure enough, within a year, the last job that I had didn't work out. I got let go, and I was just fed up. I'm like, I'm done. The stability that I was always looking for just didn't exist. And I'm like, I'm just going to go for it. And because I had put that time in, because I had built a runway, because I had a couple clients, I wasn't jumping into something like overwhelmingly new. Oh, I got to create a brand and a logo and a website, and I got to do this and that. And it's just like it could be overwhelming. No, all that stuff was done. This train had already left the station. I jumped right into it, and the number one thing that came out of that because of that was it broke down my fear. Fear had really crippled me in the past around entrepreneurship, like fear of failing. Like, how am I going to pay my bills? Like, what if I lose a client? Like, just this fear can just psychologically overpower you. And then the fear was gone mostly. And then my business took off because of it. So the combination of creating that runway, eliminating that fear, not letting it handcuff me, everything took off from there. I just had a different attitude about it, a different energy about it. And it didn't take long before it was bigger than me. A couple months in, I got to hire somebody, then I'm hiring somebody else, and success breeds success. Those foundational pieces really allowed me to kind of build something. And certainly, to your point, all the experience that I'd had throughout my life, I kind of peppered that into what I did, and certainly made mistakes, fail up, learn from those mistakes, but just a commitment to really doing things the right way. Not saying yes to everything, sticking to your guns about who you are and your core values. All of these things helped build a scalable business. I didn't grow as fast as maybe a lot of agencies do, but I grew at the right pace to allow me to continue to live my core principles and values, stay true to who we are and what we do, not say yes to everything. And that helped us kind of scale and grow at the right rate, and allowed us to be who we are and not, just take on everything, everywhere, every time. And that's basically been our recipe. I mean, our if you look at our growth on a chart, it would probably be, slow and consistent and not like a hockey stick, but I'm okay with that because I've been able to build a lifestyle for myself that, it's freedom. I live my life the way that I want, how I want. I'm sure if I did things differently, we'd probably be bigger and make more money, but you get older in life and time starts to feel just as important as money. And for me, that's good enough. So, and I'm thrilled that I've been able to give that to others as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And actually, one of the things, I mentioned at the top that we have a lot of things in common. And so,
Yeah.
and so it's actually, like I told you, I'm very excited to have this conversation because there's so many things that you're saying that have worked for you that are the same way that I approached things. And I felt all these years wildly insecure about, felt like I was doing the wrong thing. So I love to hear it from somebody else, especially this idea of sort of, risk aversion and starting out, sort of slow and working on the side hustle. And you know, and actually in my career, I've been saved twice by that, which was I was freelancing at night and things like that, and lost a job, but had my freelance to fall back on. And then later, years later, I went back to work for another agency, same thing, worked a few years and fell back out on my freelance career. To the point where my wife was like, "What are we doing? Like, why do you keep restarting? Just do it." And we've been doing that ever since, right? And so it's fun to hear sort of this trajectory. But there's a couple of things I wanted to unpack. And you know, first of all, I wondered, you mentioned something about not saying yes to everything, and I wanted to ask you about that concept, and just see if in your experience, if maybe it came out of maturity. Like, is that something that you learned being an older person as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that wasn't just some revelation. I think, and look, I'm not naive. You know, when you're just starting a business, you're going to say yes to some things, but just out of necessity, and that's okay. And I think that's really where my learnings and education came, is because, you know, as you get older, or as you have more experiences, your instincts become pretty solid. And I think, you know, I can think every client opportunity that we've worked on that didn't work out, I can tie it back to the original conversation I had with them and honestly say the red flags went off. Like I knew to a certain extent that there's something doesn't feel right about this, but I'm going to give it a shot because, you know, we're new and we need the experience. So early on, you know, those red flags existed. I could feel them for whatever reason. You know, the professional chemistry isn't there. I felt like, I don't know if that they're going to treat my team really well. Their product really sucks. It's not, you know, it's nothing special about it. You know, good marketing doesn't fix crappy products. So I'm like, these are the kinds of things, or they had realistic expectations. Like, you know, you're going to make me a millionaire in a month. I'm like, no, like nobody can do that. Or like, you know, they looked at your pricing. They're like, well, that's a little bit more expensive than we were, like that. Like all these things are red flags. You know, today, if any of those things fire off, I'm like, I'm sorry, this isn't a good fit. Like I'm literally that black and white about it because I know it 99% of the time it's not going to end well. It's not worth it for the 1% that it might. So we've reached a maturity level with the business that I can do that. I can afford to say no. But in those early stages, you know, those flags raised, but I'm like, oh, I got to go for it. They never worked out. And I learned through that, right? Client slips through, treats my team like crap. I'm like, nope, you're fired. I cannot afford to have people treat my team like crap. Not going to have it. Or, you know, 2 months in, they're like, why don't I have 6-figure sales? I'm like, we've been working 2 months with you. And the first month was onboarding. So it's like, nope, this isn't going to work. You clearly don't feel good about this and what you're investing in it. So it's not worth it. It's exhausting to you as a business owner. It's exhausting to your team. So you just learn to eventually get to a place where you hope that you reach a threshold of success that you can comfortably say no. And it's not going to be comfortable. I mean, it's kind of like over time it gets more comfortable, but you kind of have to force yourself to just get to a point where it's pretty black and white. Trust your instincts, you know, put things in place. Like one of the best things that we ever did was the evolution of our contact form on our website, right? So everybody that comes to us that's interested, they don't call. They fill out a form on our website and then we follow up. Over time, I've learned how to evolve the methodology that we've used on our contact form to lessen the amount of spam and unqualified leads. So now we've really gotten into a rhythm where, yeah, I don't get as many leads, but the ones that I get, there's a 90% chance that they're qualified. Whereas before it was like 30, 40. So you start to put things in place from a technology standpoint, from a process standpoint. You start to gain efficiencies. You're not wasting time on opportunities that don't make sense for you, so that by the time that you're actually getting on the call with them, there's a much higher probability that it's a good fit. They've already been vetted, and you're not wasting your time on the phone with them. So we've really gotten into a pretty sweet spot around that and figured out those things. But to your point, it doesn't happen overnight. I don't care how many books you read. I don't care how much you listen to my podcast or anybody's podcast. We can tell you all of these things, but there's a lot of weight that goes into just experiencing these things and learning from what works and what doesn't for yourself, and then iterating off of that.
Yeah, no, it's funny because as we talk about just sort of our mutual sort of path into entrepreneurship, which was sort of this slow burn, working for other people, and then ultimately arriving. And then even when we did arrive, you know, I've got to make sure I've got enough money for the family. So I'm going to just take some side work, and then, you know, like sort of this easing into it. But you mentioned before that your growth might be a little bit slow and unlike the hockey stick. But I wondered if you could talk, you know, about, you know, sort of your career began as sort of risk aversion, like this is the simple way to get in.
Yeah.
However, I think part of finding success is learning to be more tolerant of risks. And I think sort of what you were just describing, which is, in this scenario that we were just discussing, it was being able to say no.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I'm curious if it was really about money and financial stability as much as it was about, knowing what was a good fit and becoming more willing to take a risk and just say, no, this isn't good. Sort of, I guess, almost put faith in the concept that somebody better is going to come along. And so I wonder if that is, again, maturity, or if this is part of that process, just as you do the work and you spend time in your business, if you can actually evolve to become more, tolerant of risk.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. I think one of the faults that I had as a business owner is that I was very much risk aversion, especially financially, because I always wanted to make sure that I had a significant nest egg to fall back on. Because I've been in the agency game long enough to know that there are hills and valleys to this game. I think like right now, I'm not sure when this will publish, but we're in the middle of a recession. It's impacting us. It's impacting a lot of agencies. It's unavoidable. And I want to make sure that I have the resources to kind of see through those challenging times. And I did that to a fault. I think that it prohibited me from making bigger moves or investing more significantly. And I think that contributed to slower growth. It wasn't until, again, running the business for a certain amount of time and realizing, if, I got to decide who we want to be, do we want to be, when you look at an agency or a business, I think there's different levels of success. Like you reach certain thresholds. And for me, like I wanted to hit being that $1 million agency. That was always kind of like a threshold that I wanted to hit. And it was just like, I was getting close, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. This constant back and forth. And I realized, part of the equation was basically, I wasn't making bigger moves, taking a little bit more risk, investing more money in advertising, or maybe hiring more than what we needed to accommodate future growth instead of just reacting. So it was these kinds of things that I finally realized, what, I got to take some bigger leaps here, because I'm doing the business and my team a disservice by being overly risk aversion. For the most part, that move was a good one. It allowed us to kind of break through that barrier. It's allowed me to be a little bit more balanced business owner in terms of not kind of being too extreme about how I take risks. So that's definitely something that I learned over time. I don't think that that's one of the things that, again, you read a book or you listen to a podcast and you can just instantly be risk averse or less risk averse. I think it's just everybody's a little bit different in terms of what their blind spots are. I think the best thing that you can do is to just approach things from I don't know everything. I don't know everything. I realize that. Hire people that are better than me. Surround myself with mentors and people that you trust that can help you learn and grow and think differently outside of your own kind of lane. If you take that approach, then you're going to work through anything. So I think that's really just the mentality that you have to have if you want to build a long-term business.
Yeah, that seems right. And, I wanted to sort of explore this a little bit further and talk just about, in your case. So, I mean, you did, obviously it was an evolution, right? It wasn't an overnight thing. Like you mentioned, you didn't just watch a video and all of a sudden, boom, I'm risk averse or, risk tolerant. But I wanted to sort of frame this a little bit differently or talk about it in the sense of a different kind of mindset. So when I was preparing for this show, I was listening to one of your podcasts from earlier in July with a guy named Brian Bogert. And I thought it was really an interesting conversation. I mean, for me, it was wildly therapeutic, right? Because a lot of sort of the, I guess, personality conflicts or sort of, even side effects of the way that you were raised and things like that all parallel mine. So I actually really enjoyed the conversation. But one of the things he talked about in that conversation and was trying to get you to explore, and I would encourage anybody to go take a listen to this podcast. In fact, I'll put it in the show notes just so anybody can go back and listen to this episode. But he talked a lot about scarcity versus abundance mindset. And I feel like this concept of scarcity versus abundance is critical. And I think it allows for things like, risk aversion versus risk tolerance. I think it allows for decision making that allows you to move a business forward and that sort of thing. And so much of us, or so many of us, are trapped in this, right? And especially right now, like, at the time this episode is being taped, we're right in the heart of a recession that's likely going to get worse before it gets better.
Mhm.
I mean, we're all surrounded by fears and things like that, and very few people are actually looking at all the opportunities that are becoming available. And so, but I think so much of it roots back to this scarcity versus abundance mindset. And so I wondered if you'd talk just a little bit about, this concept that Brian brings up, which is this idea of playing not to lose versus playing to win.
Mhm.
And I think both
Yeah.
you and I come from the same background, both single parent household, both had sort of these, I guess, ideas maybe implanted in us, which is
Yeah.
part of what led to our maybe our slower
Mhm.
growth or our sort of risk aversion, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you would sort of talk about overcoming those. And I wondered if there's maybe a catalyst or if there's anything you could point to in your life that was the factor. Like, hey, I realized that if I don't make a choice today, if I
Yeah.
don't, take this step, then, X is going to happen or whatever. I just wondered if you had a specific marker that you could point to that was like a pivot point for you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's all interesting. So I love that interview. There's therapeutic for myself as well. I think, so to kind of touch on the whole part of what you're kind of saying, it definitely came from, I think my risk aversion came from, I grew up poor, single mom, me, my brother, grew up poor, didn't know it at the time, you only know what you know, but looking back now, I certainly can see how, we did not have a lot. So I'm certainly somebody that I think is a little bit more risk averse because of it, because I'm afraid, it's like that fear that's deep down, like, oh, I don't want to, fall back into that similar. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? But it's psychology, it's how you grow up. But I'm self-aware enough to know that that's where it's coming from. So I've been able to kind of work through it. But in terms of, I think a breakthrough, I don't know. I think it was just, you get so busy working on things and sometimes you just forget to kind of take a step back and see what you've achieved. And I don't know if there was if it was one specific moment, but um, I think that I always had this $1 million business. Like it just saying that just didn't seem real to me. Like I never thought, when I started the business, I'm like, is that really like possible? I'm like, am I that guy? Like, is this gonna happen? Like, and as I got closer and closer, I'd be driving in the car, and I'm not like, I don't even know if I have tear ducts, so I don't cry very much, and I don't, but I'm not like emotional, but I'm very not sentimental is not the right word. I can't think of the word. It starts with an S, but I drive in the car and I think about, I envision hitting $1 million, and I could feel myself start to like get really emotional about it. Not sensitive. Yeah, maybe sensitive is the right one. And I think about it all the time, and I'm just like, man, when I hit that, I'm like, what's going to happen? And I can remember the day that I did. I woke up one morning and had an email from a client that said, we're in. They signed the contract, and that was the moment that I hit, $1 million in revenue, and I just like lost it. I just like, it was like this moment of like achievement that I never thought was possible for myself. And a lot of it took me back to my mom, who passed away a long time, like back in 2006, and just wishing she were there and to have seen what I was able to achieve. It was just this incredibly emotional moment. And ever since then, it's just like, well, it doesn't matter whatever happens moving forward. Like I've accomplished something that I never thought would be possible for myself. And no matter how much failure we hit, or if we dip under, like I made it. It doesn't matter. And I think that moment of achievement for me, that was my barrier, or that was my mountaintop, I guess. Everything else is just gravy. It's just like, and I think that opened up some, like, I can take some chances. Like now I just felt like, it just opened me up a little bit in terms of like, let's take some risks. Let's try some things. Let's go big. And I think that was probably the moment that kind of broke through for me. And I'm sure there's a lot more psychology and depth to that I even am aware of. But and then obviously the book came from that, right? That was the reason for the book. I'm like, well, if I can do this, anybody can do this. And I'm going to write about what I did and how I did it, because I know there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other people that want to find their freedom. And I want to help them, bridge that gap too.
You know, it's funny, and I don't know if it's just for people that are sort of our age or contemporary, to us. I don't know if it'll be the same for a kid born in 2022.
Sure.
But that number, $1 million, is like hugely symbolic.
Yeah.
At least, like, to me, it resonates a lot. Like, that was the milestone. Now, if you're born in 2022, maybe it's going to be
Yeah.
$10. I don't know.
Right. It's not the same
But
anymore.
for me, this concept of $1 million was really symbolic, right? And it
Mhm.
really means something. That's like the I made it mark.
Yeah.
And so the way that you've described that is really, I mean, it's beautiful that you felt that way, and that you were able to sort of, I guess, be willing to finally recognize the hard work you put in and stuff. Because I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially those that are sort of gluttons for punishment and just work
Mhm.
themselves to the bone, sometimes you don't stop and smell the flowers, or
Yeah.
stop and smell the roses. And so,
Yep.
so I'm glad that you were able to sort of see that. But I also think that the fact that you were able to recognize sort of a, even if only just symbolic, but a shift in your mindset at that point, that sort of gave you permission to now go forward.
Yeah.
I think especially people who are trying to develop, personal brands or establish expertise in a field or something,
Mhm.
it's really hard to get past that sort of imposter syndrome thing. And I think
Yeah.
especially for a lot of
Mhm.
young people, they really struggle with this. I
Yeah.
still struggle with it on occasion. I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of
Me
folks
too.
do. And, I think one of the things, it's kind of, I mean, it's dumb, but this is one of the things that keeps coming to me as just a theme throughout this conversation, is this idea that it's okay. So, like, to be afraid, it's okay. To
Mhm.
take the baby steps into business and not go full hog, like maybe some of these startup founders that are venture backed or something might.
Yeah.
Like, it's all okay. Whatever your
Mhm.
approach is okay. And I think giving yourself permission to understand that whatever you're doing is all right, I
Mhm.
think is of value, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it's not, maybe, but for me, I keep hearing that in the back of my head as you're talking about these different milestones or overcoming, risk aversion or overcoming fear. This idea is that it's not even so much about like slaying the dragon as it is about being okay with where you are.
Mhm.
And so I think that that's a really powerful thought.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of slaying the dragon, tangentially related to all this stuff is fear, and we've talked a couple of times about how fear was holding you back.
Yeah.
And I wondered, and maybe it's too close of question to what we were just talking about with sort of scarcity versus abundance, but I wonder if you could talk about sort of a time that maybe you were afraid to make a decision and then
Mhm.
you were able to push through and do it anyway. So, in my case, maybe it was, earlier this year, actually, for the first time ever, I decided to try and outsource my sales. So I
Yeah.
brought on a
Oh,
company
good
that was
one.
really scary for me, right?
Yeah.
And so I brought on a company. Unfortunately, it was a dismal failure. But
Yeah.
I was able to look at it and go, especially on the advice of every agency owner I say, or I know, that says, no, don't do this. Don't do this.
Mhm.
It doesn't work for agencies. I was able to at least look at it, and I grew from it. I was able to say,
Yeah.
okay, well, the reason they failed is because I didn't prepare them. They didn't know my business well enough to sell it.
Yeah.
And so, I was able to take that learning away from it, something I might not have got otherwise. But for me,
Mhm.
nonetheless, that was a scary moment to make a big investment.
Yeah.
It was kind of a rolling of the dice, right?
Mhm.
Just, in my case, that relationship didn't work out, but some of the good things that came from it, have been good.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's a moment in sort of the growth of your company, or even in just your personal experience, or maybe even as it pertains to writing the book,
Yeah.
that basically there was something that for you was either physically or emotionally scary, and
Yeah.
you were able to dig deep and find the perseverance.
Yeah. I love that I have quick answers for you for these. Yeah, there's one that stands out more than anything. It's transitioning the majority of my team from contractors to employees. I knew that at some point I was going to have to kind of think that way. And a lot of, how the company was built and who I had on my team it wasn't driven so much by my lack of willingness to go down that path as much as it was the people that I had were content with being contractors. They liked that freedom. They liked that the tax ramifications of that for themselves. So it wasn't like I was forcing them to stay classified that way. And I was like, well, why should I change anything? It doesn't cost me as much money, a lot less paperwork, a lot less headaches. It's working. Why not? But then I think, after some time, a couple things started to kind of, you start thinking about, well, am I being legal here? Am I treating people like employees? Am I putting myself at risk? And just think more forward thinking, like, yeah, they're fine with it now, but let's think about 6, 12 months from now. Like, you want to keep these people. And I think that's one of the most powerful things, especially in a service-based business, is not only hiring incredible people, but keeping those people. Like, I'm naive when it comes to people. My philosophy in my head, I'm keeping you forever. You're never going to work anywhere else. Like that's my goal. That's kind of naive. That's, in this day and age, that's pretty rare. But I still believe that I can hold on to people a lot longer than most might. That's my philosophy. And I'm like, well, you probably need to start thinking about, you know, transitioning your workforce into full-time employees to give them that stability and to give them even though a lot of them are younger and maybe they're not thinking about 401ks or health benefits, you need to put those things in place because you're showing a commitment to them and that just takes it to another level. So, but that was a huge move for me. I'm talking about moving 5 to 8 people from contractors into full-time employees. That's a big investment. You're adding on easily, anywhere from 20 to 30% of additional expense just to keep the same people, but shift them into FTE status, benefits, health benefits, 401k stuff, layering in bonus stuff, all these different kind of benefits to kind of stand out from the crowd. So it was a huge undertaking. And it cut into profits, that you got this healthy profit margin that you're like, oh, it feels so good. And then it's like, that cuts that down pretty significantly. But it's like in my mind, I'm like, you got to be all right with that. A couple steps back to be able to take 3, more steps forward. So that was a tough one. I struggled with it. I knew it was the right thing to do, but it was like, it's a little bit of that fear, that risk aversion. It's like, well, we're not going to have as much to work with. So I just had to kind of power through that and understand that, this is a natural progression for a business if you want to kind of get into the next stratosphere of success. So that was a tough one. But looking back, certainly the right one.
No, I love that. And
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of that idea, you got to put a ring on it, right? Like if you want to keep
pretty much.
You got to commit, right? And I mean, basically, if you want great retention, I mean, I'm a lifelong freelancer. Our team is largely contract, I mean, it's exactly what you're describing. And, and we work with a lot of guys that are really happy being lone wolves, right? But the point you're making about, at some point, if you really want to hang on to that lone wolf, like at some point you got to bring it into bring it into the den. Like, you got to be part of that. And part of that, I mean, not only does it, feel better for you, but it's also better for that person, even if they don't know it yet, or even if they don't recognize that. And, I mean, your experience is similar to mine in that, I mean, in the advertising realm, I mean, you take jobs, you get laid off, there's, clients come and go, all that kind of stuff. And so it's very tumultuous. So I think for a lot of people, myself included, freelance made a lot of sense for me. Right. Yeah. Because like I could then control whether things are going up or down. Right. I'm not at the whim of some agency.
No.
But,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say there's a place for both too. I want to be clear. Like you shouldn't necessarily make everybody an employee or everybody a contractor. I think it's basically a mix of both. And look, some people don't want to be employees. I'm not going to force their hand. I'm like, fine, that's okay. You don't have to be that if you don't want to be. But where it becomes really critical is like key, like depending on where you're at as an agency, like now I have like a director of operations. Like I'm not in the business at all. Like I'm outside of it quite a bit. To your point, another fearful thing, I did hire a salesperson myself, which was kind of a scary thing. But I've got a salesperson, I've got a director of operations, I've got another senior level role. Like they're running the business. Like I've been able to pull myself away to do things like this, to write the book, to promote the book, do bigger things, and helping others kind of, start their businesses. And a lot, it just depends what's important to you as a business owner. Do you want to be in the business? Do you want to work on that stuff? Do you just want to be a certain level of size? Well, then you may not have to, surround yourself with a lot of employees. Or are you the type of person that's like, I want to build this business up and I want to pull myself out of it and I want to work 10 hours a week and just kind of be the face of it or just kind of like help, strategically. Well, you're going to need to bring in a director of operations or key strategic roles that can run that business for you that you can trust. They're going to have to be employees. So, there's a time and a place for how you navigate that, depending on what's important to you and how big you want to be and what that growth looks like for you in terms of your business.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's a really good point and actually, kind of a fruitful topic maybe to explore a little deeper, which is, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs that get caught in this trap, right? The idea when they start their business is not to build, well, I mean, for many of us, we make a job, not a career, right? Or
right.
Business. And you always hear the phrase, this idea that you should be working on your business, not in it. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, if you're the, tactician, if you're the one that does the thing that you're selling, it is really hard to remove yourself. And so I wondered, if you talk a little bit about just that experience, but maybe frame it in the, through the lens of hire number one, when you
Hmm.
made that decision that it was time to make this move and we need to make somebody a full-time employee, whether this was somebody that was already contract for you that you decided to keep, or maybe a new person altogether. I
Yeah.
wonder if you talk about just sort of, I guess, your vetting process a little bit and
Yeah.
how you made the decision to ultimately hire this person, and maybe any pitfalls that you were able to step over by working through it in a certain way.
Yeah, so I learned a ton at Microsoft about hiring. I went through their whole training. That was a huge component to me being able to be in a position to do that well. So I feel fortunate for that. So I think we do a pretty good job of that. You got to hire rock star people, never settle. I think that ultimately hire for the traits that are untrainable. Good communicator, good heart, treats people well, has an entrepreneurial spirit, like all of these kind of like innate things that you either are or aren't. I really focus on. And for me, I was very fortunate. I mean, one of my very first hires, Joanna, who's my current director of operations, she came in as a contractor working like 10 hours a week on paid social stuff. And she just over time, we connected and she was just incredible. And so I gave her more and more responsibilities and flash forward a couple of years later and now she's running the business. She's well on her way to being a CEO of this business, and she runs it and I trust her 100%. And a lot of that is just the relationship we've been able to foster and what's important to her, and the things that she wanted to do in her life. And really we live a life of freedom. It's not about how many hours you work or where you work. If you trust people, if you give them room to live and live their best lives, they're going to do incredible work and they're going to stick around and they're going to be loyal and they're going to work hard and they're going to care. So I was very lucky to just come across her early on and watch her grow and, become kind of slide into the role that she has right now. So
Well,
there's
I
definitely
wanted to
some,
ask you about like Joanna specifically in her
yeah,
case, right? I mean,
yeah,
obviously you developed a relationship over some time. This
yeah,
was some random applicant, for example.
yeah,
But how much of, where she is today
yeah.
was, I guess, sort of born from her, right? So this was her characteristics and her drive and her
Hmm.
interests and her all those things versus what you imparted on her. And the reason I ask, and the
Yeah,
reason I'm trying to understand this part, is for that person who is trying to develop the trust to move out of their business and actually
yeah,
bring somebody in to run it. Like, I think one hurdle or one potential roadblock that people see is, well, I have to train somebody, I have to get them,
yeah,
they need to be me, right? It's a
hmm,
replacement of me.
yeah.
And so I wonder, if you can sort of break that down a little bit.
Yeah. No, she look, she might tell you differently, because I'm overly humble in terms of what I bring to the table and who I am, almost to a fault. But I mean, look, the reason she's where she's at has more to do with just who she is as a person, and just her I just there's a little bit of luck with her. I mean, obviously I came across her at the right time in the right place, but it's not just one thing. I think it's just we connected. She's good people. I always talk about this concept of good people, which I feel is like not the norm anymore. So it's hard to find really good people that just they just get it. They know how to communicate. They have intellectual horsepower. They have emotional intelligence. That's a big thing that I talk about a lot, is the whole emotional intelligence piece. Is just she knows how to navigate difficult situations. She doesn't take things too personally. She's just she's got that rock star approach to things. I don't have to worry about anything with her, and I think a lot of that just was born. I think a lot of it comes from you know I'm very nurturing, and how I might treat my relationships. I have a very small circle of people that, but if you're in that circle, I take care of you. I feel like I'm generous. And I think just treating her incredibly well and allowing her to live her best life just made her want to be better at everything that she does. She feels empowered. She feels in charge of what she does, and she wants to do more. She wants to be better. And I think when you just treat people that way, and this is part of the anti-agency thing, right? I mean, we do things very differently. Sometimes to a fault. Sometimes I'm overly generous, and sometimes that you could probably poke holes in that, but I think much more good has come out of it than bad. And she's a direct result of that. Somebody that I trust that runs the business and will continue to probably take on more responsibility. So I think it's just, you've got to find the core values of, do they align to you? Are you the kind of person that is going to treat people well and allow people to do things that matter and not get overly concerned about things that don't, like, oh, are they working? Like everybody always asks me, like, oh, how do you know what they're working on, or how? I'm like, I don't care. I care about results. Like, here's your work, do it. I don't care if when you do it, just be where you need to be when you need to be there. Do kick-ass work. Be an adult. Another anti-agency thing we do. We don't track hours, which seems crazy in the agency game, right? Oh, you got to track hours. Like we don't do hourly. And I used to track hours to get some baselines, but we don't do it anymore. Team loves it. Why? I mean, I was just like, why am I doing this? What value am I getting out of this? Is it because I need to know that they're working? Like, it was great for a little while because it kind of gave us a sense of like, how long does it take to do this thing or that thing? But after a year of that, it's like, we kind of know. So it's like, what? No more time tracking. I don't care, freedom. So I think a lot of it has to do with that mentality. You treat people incredibly well and you give them freedom. Everything else comes from that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more here in our sort of closing minutes.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about just sort of this anti-agency ethic and where that sort of came from. We talked a little bit off air prior to the show that this is something that I'm very interested in as well. Mean, having worked in traditional agencies, there are things that I don't like about that we've tried to fix in our business. But one of the things that you really push through your book, Anti-Agency, is, these ideas of, doing things just a little bit differently. And you've just given a couple examples, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about just sort of that ethic and what it really means to you to be sort of anti-agency as an agency.
Yeah. And, the funny thing about it is that I don't claim to be like an inventor of all of these sorts of things. There's other people that do them. But I think just collectively, when I think about all the things that we've done that have allowed us to be this successful, it felt like it was against the norm. Now, as time goes on, a lot of these things start to become the norm, right? Like one of the things I might talk about is, we're a virtual agency and we don't time track. And it's about the work. I don't care when or how, like, that I believe makes us still somewhat anti-agency, but I think a lot of people are coming around and realizing, well, this is the new norm. So that's certainly part of it. I think the other thing is just, I'm very transparent about the business. I talk to my team about, the health of the business, where we're at financially. I'm very, I have a zero tolerance policy if clients treat my team poorly. My team is my business, and I just have a zero tolerance policy for clients that treat them poorly. Unlimited vacation. Like it's like, you need time off, take time off. I don't, again, not a revelation. There's plenty of companies that are kind of moving to that sort of model. Saying no to more than we say yes. Is definitely something that I think aligns to that. And, we do a lot of month-to-month contracts with clients, which has been kind of anti-agency. I think a lot of agencies do 6-12 month contracts. Our philosophy's been, we do great work. You're going to stick around, we got to earn it. So those are the things that kind of come to mind in terms of, everything that we do is just trying to spin things on their head. And like another one that we're kind of floating around right now is, and for us, I don't know that it would be as much impactful, but like, do we want to not work on Fridays? Should we just do Monday through Thursday and just remove Fridays, from the mix? So we're exploring that. What does that look like as a business? We got to make sure our clients are taken care of and it doesn't impact them in a negative way. But is that, something that might be a significant move for us? Interestingly, we put out a survey to our team and it wasn't as important to them as we thought it could be. And I think that's a reflection of the fact of how we've just been as a culture, which is we don't track time. We don't care when you work. We don't care where you work. So shifting to that isn't much like, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. We already feel like we're living a life of freedom. But it's like always pushing ourselves to kind of think about, what can we do that's unique and different for our clients or for the business that kind of breaks the norm. So we're always kind of have that mindset in place.
I love that, and you keep sort of, and maybe this goes back to sort of that humility, right? But you sort of keep couching all these things that you're doing as, oh, well, other people are doing this. But like, I mean, yeah, they are, but I mean, the lion's share aren't.
Yeah.
The lion's share are still, doing things in sort of, I guess, what we would consider older or more traditional ways. And, for good or for bad, right? I mean, maybe it depends on the business. Maybe it depends on the leadership. Maybe some leaders aren't capable of leading this way, right? Maybe that would give them incredible amounts of anxiety or something, right? So, I mean, different strokes, right? And this is one of the things that you can offer. And so, but I think that one point that I just really wanted to call out was because of your transparency or because of your policy of sort of sharing these decisions with the people on your team. And maybe this is something that's more unique to smaller organizations where you've got, 8 or 10 or 15 people where you can have these conversations.
Mhm.
But being able to include them in those things, I think is really important, especially in the agency world, because
Yeah.
traditionally, especially in big shops, like things are run top down. Like these
Mhm.
things are imposed on you, right? Even if it's
Right.
good or bad or whatever, like maybe we're not going to work Fridays anymore, but that comes from senior leadership or something, right? Somebody's
Yeah.
rolling that downhill on you.
Mhm.
And as you've discovered, when you offered that to your people, they're like, well, yeah, no, cool, but it's not critical, right? It's not that big a deal to us.
Yeah.
And but I think being able to receive that feedback and now go, okay, well, maybe Fridays off isn't that critical, but I don't know, maybe we start Mondays at noon or something, whatever
Right.
the next thing is.
Yeah.
I think being able to have that conversation with the people you work with is important. And I think it also sort of just reinforces the, I guess, trust in your team that you've sort of been espousing here, and how important trust is as a factor.
Yeah. I pretty much my philosophy is make it damn near impossible for anybody to ever want to leave working for this company. That's my goal. That's how I live. That's how I think about it. Because hiring, training, mentoring, onboarding, these are expensive, time-consuming things. And if you're constantly having to churn through people, like you're going to die in the vine. So, been very lucky enough to be able to combat that by having an amazing team that stuck around for a long period of time. And again, success breeds success. People stick around, they get better at their jobs. They become more efficient. What might have taken them 40 hours a week to manage over time maybe takes less amount of time. So it's a really great formula. And I just live a life of just being generous. I don't need, you know, millions and millions of dollars. Like as long as I can live comfortably, the bills are paid, I get to live the life that I want. I'm going to give back to the people that have allowed me to live that type of life, because that's what's going to make the business scalable and ensure that I have it throughout whatever time I have left on this planet. So,
well, and I think that, that goes back to this conversation that we were having earlier about sort of scarcity versus abundance and sort of just the mindset that is required to sort of just be happy and healthy. And back to my stupid little call out, this concept of it's okay.
yeah,
Right. Like, I mean, I don't need to be a billionaire. I don't need any of this stuff. What I really need is just to be free to do what I want to do and move around
yeah,
and do. And that's what I need. That's what you're trying to buy with money anyway. Right. I mean, when people are trying to become
sure,
or whatever, I mean, most people, I think, are trying to either buy stuff or buy freedom.
yeah.
And so, if you're not a stuff buyer, then you might find that you can get to freedom a lot cheaper than you think.
I think people realize pretty quickly, like certainly, it's nice to buy a cool car or this or that, but that gets old pretty quick. There's nothing more empowering and feeling incredible than controlling your life. I don't have to sit in traffic for 2 hours. I don't have to be tied to a desk from 9 to 5. I'm not sitting in all these unnecessary meetings. Like you can wake up one day and say, you know what? I'll take the day off and I'm going to go fish or I'm going to go do this or I'm going to do that. And you can do it. And that's, to me, that's how everybody should, not everybody. There's certain people that are fine with predictability and stability and want that kind of routine. I think a lot of people would prefer to be able to wake up every day and decide how they want to live their life. And look, you have to work hard, depending on where you're at in your life. Like could I do that, in the first year or two of the business? No. Could I do it now? Yeah, I've got an amazing team. It's been we're a couple of years in. I put the things in place. I could take a day off if I wanted to. Now, I don't take a day off up here in my head. I mean, I'm always thinking about the business, right? But physically, like, hey, if I want to go, to Cabo San Lucas for a week, all right, here we go. Like that's such an incredible to be in that position to be able to do that. And that's not lost on me. Like I touched on earlier, I grew up poor. I appreciate what I have. I give back. Like with the book that I have, I give 15% of the proceeds back to a domestic violence shelter. Like I want to give back. We have a socialistics cares program at our agency. We always highlight, an organization and donate and provide, coverage for them. So, but I think that's inherently why we are what we are, and we've been able to do what we do. Good people with good hearts that care about each other, that care about making the world a better place for themselves, their family, their friends, and the organizations that they care about. And so that's why we're where we're at.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I couldn't probably say it any better. So let's just leave it like that.
Yeah.
Here in the last minute or so, do you want to share, how people can track you down if they want to engage with you socially? I know you do some speaking and podcasting. or, how people can engage with the organization, or just, anything you want to share.
Yeah, for sure. Like if anybody's heard anything that I'm always happy to jump on a call, help people. I don't, you want 10, 15 minutes of my time to help you navigate something. Just, you can find me at, jasonyormark.com, personally. You can find me at socialistics.com. Like I said, I've got my book, Anti-Agency. You can get it at antiagencybook.com. And hey, if times are tough and you don't want to pull the trigger, just shoot me an email, give me a call. I've got about a 200 books sitting in my closet right now. I'll send you a copy. All I care about is helping people navigate finding their path to entrepreneurship. Because honestly, even if one person ever got back to me and said, I read your book and I built $1 million business someday, and your book had a lot to, I mean, that in and of itself would bring me a level of satisfaction that it was worth it. So anything that you need, feel free to reach me out on any of those paths, and happy to be a resource for you.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Jason. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah.
We were ships in the night a week ago, and I couldn't be more happy that we were able to make, coordinate this and make it happen again, because, for me anyway, this conversation was really important. And just knowing what I do about you through having listened to your podcast and things, I'm really grateful to have had this time to visit. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on the show. Great time.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. See you guys next time.